Sourdough live. We're sourdough live. I think. Are we?
Right, people are joining now.
People are joining? Okay. And is Dan joining us? I don't know how to do this. Yeah, I have to do it like...
People are saying hi, 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 hi.
I hope everyone's dough is looking good.
Dan has requested to join. Here we go.
Where's Dan?
We're it's loading up now. People are saying hi.
How's everyone's dough been? Has it been behaving? This is what mine looks like right now.
Sid says hi from Atlanta.
Hey Sid. Jiggly.
Brennan is asking what are we making.
Sourdough focaccia. Well, we have been making sourdough focaccia.
Hello from New York.
And Dan isn't part of it yet?
Dan is just loading now.
Cool. So this next stage, just to let people know, this next stage is going to be, we're going to be doing another stretch and fold. Slightly different, but almost the same. And we're going to be putting it in our tin. And then it's another time to just rest and relax. Bread making is quite nice, like the sourdough one, because it's slow. It takes time, but you're only doing it for a few seconds, sometimes minutes, and it gives a nice structure to the day. So I definitely advise people going on a more of a sourdough journey after this.
Kremi says hi from your future wife.
Hey, Kremi.
Hello from Mississippi, from Madrid,
Oh.
Calgary.
Wow, literally all over.
Manchester. We're still waiting for Dan. I've just requested him again. Let's see. It says it's waiting.
So people that don't know Dan, Dan is...
Here we go. Hey, Dan.
Hey.
Hold on.
Let's reset the framing. Here we go.
Down with that. Hello.
Hey, Dan.
Let's see. There we go. Dan, we lost you for a second there. You're back now. Can you hear us?
I can hear you really well.
Hi, Dan. Can you turn it?
Can I?
Turn it up.
That's it.
How are you doing, Dan?
So, I cannot hear you. So, hold on.
Okay, well, whilst Dan's trying to sort that out, I'm just going to introduce him. So Dan is a sourdough master. I've said this again and again. He had a sourdough book, this one, which was my first one that I did sourdough from. This was published first in 2004. So that's 16 years ago now. And it's really, really good. And since then, Dan has been like a master baker in so many different restaurants, etc. And then he's written for so many different publications, written multiple books, and he's definitely known in the UK and globally as a bit of a sourdough sage. So any questions that you have, he will be able to answer. But saying that, a lot of sourdough is just learning as you go along as well.
He's in now.
Can you hear me now, Dan?
Good. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I was just doing an introduction about you.
I loved it. It was amazing. Keep going. Keep going.
And I have to say, I've already learned so much. But I think, like I was saying, like some of it is you just learn as you go along, don't you? You just like...
Absolutely.
Like it's a strange thing that we've just got. Like it's quite exciting for people that with all these fancy recipes people do now for cakes and things, this is just water, flour and salt.
Absolutely. And I think that's the point, that in this sort of worrying time, you can make food, you can make great things for you just with really simple ingredients.
Yeah, and I chose focaccia just because people have different flours. So sometimes flours with more gluten are good for kind of peakier loaves, aren't they? Whereas this one, people could have used strong white bread flour or they could have used plain flour and it still will work for a focaccia. You
know, David, I could listen to your science always. Somehow, when you say it, it just sounds so much better.
No way. Okay, so have you been following along, Dan? Have you done a focaccia today?
Oh, absolutely. Hold on, hold on. Here it is. Let's have a look. Here's mine. In here.
Nice, I like it.
Yeah.
So so everyone's been following, and we've done the first stretch and fold, and we've let it go for 2 hours, and it's a nice dough now full of air. So I was going to do the stretch and fold again using oil, because that's what we did the first time. And then you are going to show people how to do stretch and folding with water or with flour as well. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you can, if your hands are wet, perhaps it's easier for you. But I find I prefer oil, but I use whatever I can.
When I do my loaves, I tend to use water.
Yeah.
But I use oil when I do things like focaccia, because we're going to use lots of oil anyway to make it all tasty and crispy.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I do, I don't know if you can see, but I've got this kind of board. This is from IKEA. It's a pasta board. They're not expensive, but they're really good for, if you want to oil a surface, but not have to have this oily sort of mess in front of you, or wet, or floury, or whatever. Buy one. They're really good.
I also have one too.
No,
The same one.
The same one. Same one.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have these.
See, we're connected. Absolutely.
So, if you're going to do the stretching with oil, I'm going to start putting it in my tin now. Now, you can use, like this recipe, it's a smaller loaf. I didn't want people to waste flour and things if it didn't work and they need to practice another time. So, I'm going to do it in a 20 by 20 centimetre tin, which you'll get like a nice, fluffy, thicker focaccia, because that's what I would like. People can equally use one of these kind of tray-baked tins. It's going to be thinner, it's going to bake a lot quicker, and you don't necessarily have to have it pushed right up to the edges. Some people might have doubled the recipe, so it would definitely be good to use this. You can also just use a flat baking tray, but for the next stretch and fold, I find it easier then to do in the tin. So I'm just going to put some olive oil in my tin, and I'm going to gently get my dough out. At this stage, there's a lot of air in the dough, and so because it takes so long to rise, you don't want to be knocking all that out. So I'm going to keep it in there, and then basically just going to do some stretching and folding like before. So just picking it up, bring it back into the middle.
That looks good.
Oh, it does feel nice actually. Feels like a nice wet dough. Then, Dan, when you're doing focaccia, I tend to leave it for a little bit now before stretching it out into the tin, so that it kind of relaxes.
Yes, absolutely. Whenever you're shaping dough, before you move it to the next stage, give it a rest. For the quickest and easiest bread, always, just add lots of rests in, and you'll get a better looking loaf, a better looking focaccia. But it will, just make your life easier too.
Yeah, because like this one now we've done some stretching, it feels quite rubbery. And
Yep.
so I'm just leaving it in the middle of the tin like this. I'm going to put a bit more oil in, and then after we've been chatting for a while, I'm going to start pushing it out and stretching it to the edges.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Now I'll do the same with water. I've got a jug here, nipping off, just getting some water from the tap, and then water from tap. It's just cold temperature. I've got the bowl here, and I don't know if you can see. First of all, I'm just patting some water over the top of it. The idea is the water should stop it from sticking to your hands. Now, if it's sticking to your hands, you're not using enough water. You're not trying to add water to the dough, but really just to make sure that your hand doesn't stick to it. Then, once you've done that, the first thing I do is go around and loosen it in the bowl so that it's moving kind of freely, really, like this. David, are you getting a sourdough aroma from yours? I really am.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have been asking questions about should it be smelling so sour and yeasty, and it does depend, doesn't it? I've got certain starches I've used are more pungent, but you definitely want that kind of sour smell.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you can see the dough is very sort of soft and sticky, and I'm just lifting it up. I don't know if you can see, I'm just sort of lifting it like this so that I'm almost sort of just teasing it around in the bowl, like that. Is that what you're getting?
That looks so good.
So what do we do next?
So I've put mine into my tin already. So do you want to transfer to tin?
Yeah, I'll do that. Hold on.
Yeah.
People are asking if they can do that on the board or if they have to do it in a tin or in the bowl.
No, you can do it on the board. Either with, if you're going to do it with water or you're going to do it with oil. If you just kind of wet or oil your board first and then you can do it on the board, that's absolutely fine. A lot of people do it that way.
Right.
Sometimes it's easier to stay in the bowl just because you don't create as much mess. But yeah, definitely you can do it on a board.
Yeah. So I'm just putting some water on the tray. And then
I think for people, I'm just sorry, Dan. I'm just answering some questions to people. People have seem to have missed a step. If anyone's missed a step, just have a look at the stories before. I think that'll make sense.
Yeah, good thing.
Dan, do you ever, with breads like focaccia where you want to have them really nice and brown, do you ever put sugar in your dough or not?
Sometimes, or I might replace the water in the recipe with half beer, half water, sugar in. Or if you can get, if there's a home brewing supplier near you, or you can find one on the internet, get some malt. Malt is really good. And it is traditionally used in Italian bread baking, so it's a good one to look out for.
Like the malt, like the sticky malt extract.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because for people that don't know, like the crust, when the crust goes nice and brown, that's kind of the sugars caramelizing, and there are obviously the starches in the flour have been broken down into sugars, but you can also give that a helping hand. I had something called diastatic malt flour as well.
Yeah. That's
How
really
does that
good.
work?
Oh, what that does is it's an active malt, if you like. So it helps the enzymes to work within the dough. Sometimes bakers don't want that; they just want sort of a sweet color to it. But diastatic malt will help your loaf get a better rise.
So basically, it's breaking down some of the starches in the flour to actually get the sugars, so then that will feed the yeast as well. Is that right?
Well, it stimulates the production of yeast because it is a simple sugar malt. So it's like adding sugar to a loaf, but with diastatic malt, it's more easily fermentable than simple sugars.
Cool. And Dan, we've had a lot of questions, or I have over the last few days, asking about different flours for when you're doing your sourdough starter. What can you tell us? Like some people have used, like I quite often like to use rye when I'm making my starters, but some people have been using wholemeal flours, some people have been using just white plain flour, but then also people have been asking about different grains, whether you can use buckwheat flour and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. What you're looking for in the sourdough starter is two things. One, starches to help it ferment, but the other is to hopefully over time keep introducing new microflora to it. So adding in whole grain flours, whether they be buckwheat or brown rice or rye or spelt or camel. So gosh, there's so many that you could choose from. By adding those whole grain flours in, you should get a more diverse microflora and a better flavor to your loaf.
Ah, nice. And something that people have been asking me, which I don't really know much about, because I don't really like baking with it, is gluten-free flours. Would it be any different for gluten-free flours for a starter? And are there any breads that you would suggest to make with gluten-free flour that would be better, maybe than making a loaf that's quite difficult to get that structure?
Absolutely, it's a great question, David, because it is different. One of the issues with simple starches is that they tend to compact. I don't know if you've ever tried to dissolve corn starch in water and it sinks to the bottom and forms a heavy layer. And if you're trying to start fermentation, that's a problem. So you need to add in something to keep those starch particles apart. Now, one thing that's really easy is the bran from the grain. So if you were to use brown rice flour or a whole grain gluten-free flour like teff, for example, you're more likely to get better aeration, and better aeration will give you better fermentation.
Ah, nice. That's good. I'm going to have to try and practice some of that because I'm not very good with gluten-free. And if I ever do gluten-free, I tend to do things like tortillas and things like that. I don't really make bread, like big breads.
But you have had teff. Have you had teff bread before?
Yeah, the injera, the Ethiopian bread. I've not made anything with the teff flour apart from injera though. I've not tried using it for anything else.
Yeah, where did you eat it in? Was this because you've been in Africa a lot? Have you?
Yeah, so I ate it in Ethiopia, and then there's some fantastic restaurants in London as well. And there's one in Woolwich called Blue Nile, and you can actually buy the teff flour from the lady that runs that restaurant. When we're allowed back outside again, of course.
Yeah. Now tell me, you travel a lot in your work. What, do you see breads, or do you seek out breads when you're doing your relief work overseas?
Yes, definitely. I absolutely love it. And I think sometimes even when the breads are kind of over here as well, like we went to India recently and saw a lot of the Indian breads, but sometimes you don't realize how they're actually made. Like you're used to seeing them in the UK, but like a paratha where they flip, it's like a ridiculously elastic dough that's flipped out really thinly and then folded all back together. So yeah, I love seeing the injera in Ethiopia was really good. Have we got any more questions, Nick?
Yeah, I'm just reading a couple questions. So there's a couple questions. So one question is, someone says that they love malt loaf. Can they do a sourdough malt? Is one of the questions.
Well, you kind of do, but I think one of the problems in a malt loaf is that you've got so much sugar in there. A lot of sugar and a lot of malt tends to slow down the fermentation, so you might find you get a really heavy loaf. A little bit of baking powder, it kind of makes it yeast-free, and if that's what you're after, then baking powder or baking soda is the way.
Awesome. And then we have another question by Anne. Any tips for using starter to replace dry yeast in recipes?
Well, yeah. Okay. The tip is you're turning it into sourdough. So it's not really possible to get your yeast so active, your sourdough so active that it's going to really make that loaf rocket like fresh yeast or that active dry yeast will. But if you're willing to be patient with it, your traditional recipes will work with sourdough. They just take a lot longer.
I quite like it. I like that a lot of sourdough recipes, as people get into this and they read more recipes and understand it, you can slow it down even further, like by putting your loaves in the fridge overnight so that you can bake them in the morning. So they've got those really long, slow fermentations.
Absolutely. And I think that's the point, that fast isn't always good. Sometimes slowing down fits in with your life. It means that you've got time to do other things. It means you're not worrying about them all the time. So yeah, I do what you're doing.
Cool. So I think now my dough seems to have relaxed down a bit. So I'm gonna try and stretch it out a little bit towards the edges.
Yeah.
Which is quite simple. You're just trying to be a bit gentle at this stage, and allow the dough to do its own thing. So just tease it out towards the edges of the tin, and then just let it relax again.
Yeah. Looks good. I'll do the same here. I don't know if you can see. I've got the dough on the tray here. I've also just got a scraper out of the places, and the two together work well. So I'm just dimpling it with my fingers and using water on it. You can see.
Nice. Yeah, these, for people who are learning about bread, scrapers are really good because they allow you to kind of hold, take the weight of the bread and slide right underneath and things. So this is a very simple but very good piece of kit.
Guys, shall we take a couple more questions as you guys are? Sorry, I missed it. So any advice for freezing starter to thaw later?
Go down.
I'd have to say, how much starter are you making? I mean, really try and keep a small amount of starter rather than filling up the freezer with starter. If I'm going away for a long time, or if I want some backup, what I'll do is make the starter really thick, leave it overnight, then spoon it onto a tray and put that tray in the freezer, and then just pull those pellets off. But I would say, as a general rule, keep less starter and try and make refreshing it part of your daily life.
Yeah, Dan, with mine, I leave my starter in the fridge for a week, and then I bring it out and refresh it, and then use it like that. I kind of allow it to go kind of slightly dormant in the fridge, rather than I used to do the refreshing every day when I did a lot more baking, but now if I'm going to do one big loaf a week, I just leave it for a week in the fridge and then bring it out that morning and make the pre-ferment.
Yeah, lovely, lovely. Yeah, I mean, I keep mine out. Hold on, I'll just get it. You can see this is the one. I just keep it at room temperature all the time. I must confess, I don't refresh it every day. I probably refresh it every 2 or 3 days, and I keep about 100 grams of it in this tub here. It smells really good. Right.
2 more questions. We have my sourdough breads turn out dense and heavy. How do I lighten it?
Well, I would say you need to check 2 things. Sometimes we immediately think it hasn't risen, but it can be that it's risen too much and that it's begun to collapse back down, and I check on that. When your dough has, after mixing it together, has visible signs of aeration, that is, air bubbles inside, it's ready to be shaped and left for its final rise. Check you're not just doing the stretch and folds too much, and the dough is actually sinking back down again. That's no good.
And we have another question by Carmen, who's asking if she's moving abroad, how can she take her starter with her?
You know what? Test. No, what I do, I put tiny little pieces in my toilet bag. And I put one in the toilet bag. Gosh, if anyone's listening from customs, they'll know where to look now. But if I put one in my toilet bag, I have another with an apple and a banana that I take on the plane with me. And people, they don't know. They think it's some sort of funny food stuff. So I smuggle it. That's my truth.
Someone was telling me today, actually, they were sending me a message saying they wanted to send me some of their starter. And the way they do it is they spread their starter on a tray, and then let it go completely dry, and then they whiz it in a coffee blender into a powder, and then they say they just need to rehydrate with water. And they're a biologist, so I think they know what they're doing, but I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, no, people drive. I mean, for me, I'm often in the situation where I need to get off the plane and make a loaf of bread the following day, so I don't really have that luxury of taking a few days to reanimate it. So I tend to travel with live starter.
Yeah, and I think some people do worry if you're waiting a couple of days, you can just refeed it, can't you? It hasn't died necessarily. It's just kind of going a bit dormant and going slower.
Oh, absolutely. You're so right. But, it's really difficult to kill a starter just by leaving it alone. Even if it's got mold on top of things, it's probably still alive. I would say that's not good practice to do, and you need to ask yourself, are you really the person to make sourdough if you keep abusing it all the time? But, it's pretty hard to kill just by leaving it on a worktop.
Yeah. I've got a question as well then. With your starter, have you had the same one? I mean, obviously it's changed, it's always evolving, but have you had the same one for a long time? Because I personally, I love taking other people's. So I'm forever taking someone else's and then using that one for a bit and then taking another one. I like kind of that community of sharing, but some people hold on to theirs for a long time, don't they?
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. I quite like the idea of sustaining a process and sharing a process. I think that's a really good part of sourdough baking. I know there's a lot of pride in making your own sourdough starter, but if someone gives me one, I feel terribly touched, and I want to sort of keep it alive, though it tends to go in the pot with the other ones. But I think this is just a really special thing when someone offers you some sourdough.
Yeah, I also do the same. Sometimes I just then stick them together and kind of make a whole new hybrid.
Yeah. What's your favorite sourdough? I mean, if you had one particular loaf that your desert island loaf, what would that be?
Oh, do you know, it probably would be a really good focaccia, really good sourdough focaccia. It definitely is one of my favorite breads. How about you? Yes, I think so. I do like the oiliness of it, and I like the salt. So I'm hoping with this one we get that similar joy out of it. Do you know, actually, I've changed my mind because there's the loaf that I baked the most out of your book. Where is it? Which is my favorite one, and I never see other people doing it as much. Is this one, which is the one with potato in?
Oh yeah. No,
when you finally grate a waxy potato, it's absolutely amazing how it kind of makes it. It gives it, because I love sourdough. I love the kind of the chewiness of sourdough, and this one gives you that perfect soft chew, I think.
Yeah. No, I think a good. one thing you can do, if you go on to Instagram, if you go and type in my name, Dan Lepard, there's a hashtag, and scroll through, you'll probably see there's people making this potato sourdough from the handmade loaf, or even do the hashtag the handmade loaf. That works too.
Yeah. More questions, Nick?
So, by adjusting to higher hydration recipe, do we need to adjust our bulk fermentation time?
Possibly. Possibly. It depends on other things. It depends on the temperature of the water. It depends on the activity within the sourdough. But I would always, when I'm changing a recipe, first do a test and see how long it takes to get to that aeration point. And then I'd make it.
I've definitely found that within the sourdough community, there seems to be a lot of kudos to people who can up the hydration. Like, it seems to be a thing that the higher the water content you can get compared to your flour is a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, loads of people love it. I mean, there is a backlash to that slightly, but see, when you push the hydration up and when you speed the fermentation, you're really getting, you're going to travel quickly towards the collapse point. And when you see these videos and shots on Instagram, the thing to remember, the thing to tell yourself is, they know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. I mean, whenever I'm learning things, I just assume I'm going to muck up the first time. So just when you're watching it, allow for a few failures if you're going to increase the hydration hugely.
Yeah, I also just like having the standard things that I do again and again that are really good. Like Nick's learning how to do sourdough now, and we're just doing my classic sourdough loaf, which is always just such a good loaf. So I never feel the need to necessarily keep on trying to up the hydration of it. Although every now and again I like to experiment as well.
And this is a great point. Teach your partner how to bake bread, and then you don't have to. I'm doing the same. I have David upstairs, my partner. He bakes bread, and I don't have to. It's a win-win.
I mean, it's been amazing. So I'm just going to actually stretch my thing out a little bit further now. So I'm now going to stretch my dough out to the edge of the tin, and so then it's at the point of leaving it.
Oh, we have a couple of people mentioning kefir.
Oh, yes, Dan. I mentioned yogurt at the start because when I used to do your starter, it talked about adding yogurt to boost the lactobacillus. A lot of people have been asking about kefir, and I've not heard, because that's now very fashionable. But kefir also has different yeasts and bacteria, doesn't it? Is that good for making a starter?
One of the reasons in the handmade loaf that I added a teaspoon of yogurt to it is not actually for the cultures so much as to slightly acidify the mixture, because that will ensure that you don't get the bad bacteria multiplying. Now, in my ideal world, just using great wholemeal flour and water and stirring it will produce a really good sourdough. Nothing else. However, sometimes we're not in that perfect world. And sometimes things, the fermentation that occurs isn't the sourdough one you want, and is a more putrefacious fermentation, a pongy one. Having the yogurt in there or the kefir will help avoid that.
Cool. I have now pressed my dough just gently out to the sides, and what we're going to do with this now is this now sits for. I mean, it really depends now on how warm your kitchen is, but you're basically looking for it to become nice, risen and bouncy. And while that process is happening, for me, like every 20 minutes, I'll just go through and just push down with my finger. So you get those kind of, with focaccia, you want to have the big bubbles being captured inside, but then also it to be kind of that, where people, I don't know, dimpled, kind of a dimpled effect, don't you?
Yeah. No, it sounds good what you're doing. I really like the sound of it. So,
and I'm just going to put a bit more oil around. I quite like a lot of the oil, the olive oil. So I'm going to leave mine now. And then we'll come back. We're going to come back to the bread later just to show you how to do the toppings as well, but I'll do that in my story later. Any more questions, Nick?
There's a question, how do I refresh my starter?
How do you refresh?
Yeah.
That's what we've been doing the last few days. So people do it in different ways. You can either remove half the starter you've already got and then add flour and water, or sometimes you can just add some extra flour and some extra water as well. So Dan, someone was asking about, well, a few people have been asking about the consistency, how some people just seem to be more watery and some people seem to be thicker. What are the advantages, disadvantages for having a thicker starter or a thinner starter?
They're both fine. Sometimes a thicker starter ferments more slowly, and that can be good in summer or in a really humid condition. So say if you're in India or in Singapore, you may find it easier to keep your sourdough as a dough rather than as a liquid. However, you know, like today, did you notice today it was hailing outside?
Yeah.
Hail, and I mean there's sunshine now, but there was hail, and it's freezing as well. I don't know if you saw, I'm keeping my dough in the oven at a warm temperature. But in order for your fermentation to go quickly in a cold temperature, you may find equal parts flour and water works better.
Yeah, I definitely, when I lived in different hot countries, I tended to do exactly what you said. I made it more into a dough. Because I just found it just would go way too active very quickly. Yeah, so it doesn't really matter. You can kind of have it. You just need to see how your sourdough behaves, your starter behaves. Yes, Nick, another question.
So another question is, I'm on day 3 of my starter. Yesterday it had lots of bubbles and doubled in size, but today, since feeding for the first time, it's gone very watery. Is that normal? And a few more people have the same question.
Well, it could be because that the fermentation is really active. So what you need to do is next time you refresh it, whether that's today or tomorrow, watch it over the next 2 hours and see if it rises up and collapses back. And that will give you an idea about the fermentation.
Yeah, because that's what I think some people worry, don't they? Because there's this rise and fall. Sometimes it rises very slowly, doesn't it? And you kind of see all these nice bubbles coming up. Sometimes it just goes very quickly and then falls again. That's not a bad thing. That still means you've got a good active starter.
Yes, yeah.
And someone's saying that they use kombucha for rice sourdough instead of live yogurt. Is that okay? Kombucha.
Kombucha, Dan? I don't know.
It's completely fine. The thing you do need to watch about is that some of these liquids and drinks sometimes are good at calming bacteria and calming fermentation. But maybe we want to excite it. So maybe at first to do sort of half kombucha, half water, or half kefir, half water. Don't kind of overload it too much at first, because you really want to get that fermentation super strong.
And Dan, what about things like, I remember reading that Italians often, when they're making their starter, they'll drop a couple of basil leaves in and then take them out after a couple of days, or using raisins or dried fruits. What's the benefit of that?
I have no idea. I have no idea, because I don't know. People do all sorts of things, and I must say, and this is going to sort of contradict the science side of my approach, but you know, sometimes if people want to do things, that's okay. You know, if someone was joking on Twitter, you know, what about putting in rose leaves into it? And I immediately said, yeah, let's go put rose leaves in. I think it's worth experimenting, because even in some of the craziness, sometimes something brilliant will emerge from it. So I tend to not to go too hard on the things I don't know about. But this is something
I guess, I mean, the theory will be people are thinking there's microorganisms everywhere, isn't there? And there's different microorganisms that grow on different things. So like you say, by experimenting, you might come across you might get a very original starter because you've been having some yeast that are naturally living on certain fruits or leaves or something. But you don't need to use them. Like the microorganisms on flour are just fine on their own.
Yes, I mean, and generally organisms live close to their food source. So the where you find them will be the source of the carbohydrates or simple sugars that they can ferment best. So the organisms that you find on organic whole wheat flour will, you know, probably ferment within that flour.
Perfect. Another question, Nick?
How can I build more structure when taken out of the bandstone? It doesn't hold its shape very well.
So Dan will probably be able to say a lot more about that. For me, I remember when people have asked me that question before, I've always shown them how to shape flour to create that kind of tension with the stretching and then with the shaping and pulling to get the tension across the loaf. And they've tended to have better results. Is there anything else, Dan?
I'd say too that, well, there's two things that as you get close to really to the edge of that exaggerated fermentation, the dough will be close to the collapse point and start flowing and tearing apart. Now, what you may do if it's flowing too much is reduce the bulk fermentation time, just so that you get a more sort of rounded and proud loaf.
Nice. And it just depends on the flour, doesn't it? Because if you've got flours that have, with gluten, you've got gliadin and glutenin, and if you've got more of the gliadin, they tend to spread a lot more, don't they? Like the focaccia, the ciabattas, and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely, you're spot on there. But maybe that's the flour you've got. Maybe if we redefine our approach as bakers, and rather than trying to produce this sort of esoteric openness, maybe what we should be doing is looking at the local flour, looking at the ingredients we have, and get the best result from them, and enhance them as an ingredient, and ask ourselves, have we done the flour proud by what we've made?
Nice, I like that. But just as but an extra thing, I think a lot of people don't shape their bread very well. So there's so many cool YouTube videos and instructions on how to kind of do that really good kind of stretching and shaping to make sure you get good tension on your loaf.
Yes. I mean, I can shape bread. I can't fold clothes. I can't make a bed very well. I mean, maybe people have different skills. I don't know, but yeah, shaping is something you can learn. Yeah.
Any other questions, Nick?
So people were asking, what's your favorite recipes to use with the leftover starter?
I do like doing a classic loaf. I didn't want to do a classic loaf for this bake along because you tend to need things like this, like banneton baskets and razor blades for slashing. So it's kind of good to work up to those usually. But you can just use a tin. Dan, do you ever do your sourdough and just do like a classic tin loaf?
Oh yes, love it. Something like, hold on. Yeah,
like this style.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so because people tend to do them in these bannetons, and you turn it out in the morning and slash down it. But if you actually just made your loaf, shaped it, put it in here, and put that in the fridge overnight, and then baked it the next morning, you will still get a really nice loaf. And maybe that's the best way to learn as well, especially for people who are saying that there's a spreading a lot. Then while you're learning about the dough and how your dough works, using a tin loaf would be quite good.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is sourdough, but this is a loaf I baked just yesterday. I think what it was. But yeah, I love a nice sort of home baked sliced loaf. And this is has a little bit of sourdough in, but it's a very sort of seedy one. It uses an interesting flour. There's one. You might scorn it a little bit when you see it at Sainsbury's. It's called brown bread flour. But the thing about it is that it's a roller milled high flour, so it's very much like the farine de moule that we used to use from. There's a miller called Viron in France, and they do a similar flour. So even though it sounds very basic flour called brown bread flour, it's really good. So look out.
I like using that as well. Dan, do you ever? Now, there's another thing that on all the sourdough forums, etc., people definitely scorn bakers that use baker's yeast at the same time as sourdough. But I do that quite often. Like if I'm making sourdough hot cross buns, then I tend to use yeast as well, instant yeast. What do you think about having that kind of hybrid of a sourdough starter with baker's yeast?
Oh, whatever gets you through the day or the night. I mean, I think it's a good thing not to scorn people, just as a general rule in life. So I'd say that first. But secondly, sourdough is a yeast fermentation, and you're taking yeast from a different source. So if you need to do that, produce a loaf of bread that you're happy with, that suits your time and suits your kitchen and suits your everything, just do it. Just do it.
Yeah.
Forget about all these naysayers. Just do what you need to do to get the best possible loaf.
Yeah, no bread shame.
Yeah, no.
Okay, another question, Nick?
People are asking if you can recap the steps of what you guys did so far today.
Well,
Yeah.
we just
It says there, yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, basically we've stretched and folded the dough again, and then into an oiled tin, let it relax for a bit, and then stretch it out towards the sides. Let it relax again, and then stretch it fully out to the sides. And then now we've just left it, and every now and again we're just going to be going and just pressing and do some dimpling.
Is there a specific time people need to wait, or like you need to wait for it?
It's really tough now because with sourdough, it's not, one of the reasons people used baker's yeast was because it was a lot more predictable. And so we're just looking now, probably it's going to be within 2 hours, I would say, with mine, Dan. What about you?
Oh, the same. Look, if we come back at 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock UK time, I think this will be looking really good.
Yeah. Yeah, so probably it's going to, like we've been leaving it for 2 hours before we do the 2 stretch and folds, it's probably going to then be the 2 hours before we bake.
Yeah, okay. So do you want to come back later then, or do you want to...
Yes, sounds good. Sounds perfect.
And also for people who are asking about how to access this, so this is going to stay live on the live is going to stay on David's story. You can rewind and watch it from the beginning, as well as then you're going to be able to access all the other stories.
And are we going to put it on YouTube, Nick?
Yeah.
With Dan's permission. Asking him live. Cool. Perfect. Right. Well, we'll see you guys soon.
See you.
Thanks, Dan.